A lot of mystery still surrounds FNAF 2, or at least mystery for the motive behind the things that happened. For a lot of fans, FNAF 2 was the kicking off point for the deep and intense lore of this franchise, presenting death minigames like Save Them and Give Gifts, Give Life, and for the most part, we know what these events are. Give Gifts, Give Life seems to be the marionette assisting the missing child incident victims in possessing the animatronics. Give Cake to the Children seems to be William Afton killing Charlotte Emily, and Save Them seems to be another batch of children murdered at a Freddy's location, this time the FNAF 2 one. But here's the thing, we know what these events are, but the why is still a mystery to us, especially with something like Save Them, or what fans have been calling the Dead Child Incident, or DCI. All this time and we're still not 100% sure on how they died, why they died, and if their spirits possessed anything. And I think it's high time that somebody definitively solved with conclusive evidence what those answers are. Unfortunately, I don't know who that could be, so you're stuck with me giving my best guess. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. By the way, I'm using the same microphone, but I have a new interface which has a better preamp, so I had to redo all my audio settings, so if the audio sounds much better or much worse than it used to, let me know. I'm trying to readjust everything. Hopefully it should theoretically be better, but probably 80% of you won't notice because I'm just really picky about this shit. FNAF 2 itself is centered around the shortest ever open Freddy's location. We know from the newspaper at the end of the game that it was only open for a few short weeks in 1987. Trying to move past the bad PR of the missing child incident, this new Freddy Fazbear's toted additional security with intensive measures. The new toy animatronics literally had a criminal database that they could scan people's faces and compare with. Everything about this restaurant seemed like it was supposed to be the safest place your children could be, but literally within like a month that proved to be not true. The new animatronics would act strangely with adults staring at them for long periods of time. Eventually, one of the animatronics attacked what seems to be an employee, severing their frontal lobe. And like I mentioned earlier, 5 kids end up getting killed and their bodies are strewn about the restaurant. We also know that someone used a spare yellow suit in the back and all the animatronics started going crazy. By the end of it, it shut down and the toys are scrapped. But it's mentioned that the original animatronics are kept in the hopes that they can reopen sometime in the future. So we know all of this, but we still don't know why any of that bad stuff happened. I think the Dead Child incident is the linchpin to this entire issue. If we can figure out why a bunch of kids died at the FNAF 2 location, then that context might help us answer a lot of the other questions we have about this situation. But the Dead Child incident is one of the weirdest parts of the lore for a lot of fans of this franchise. So much so that most fans just kind of gloss over it. The spirits don't seem to go anywhere unless you believe that they're possessing the toys, but that presents a whole nother slew of issues. After all, the toys are acting strangely on day 1, and it seems like the children were killed near the end of the week. But even if they did end up in the toys, we're not sure what happens to them after that, unless you believe that the FNAF 2 kids are what end up in Molten Freddy, but circumstantial evidence from FNAF 6 goes against that. It's just a whole confusing mess. So something that might help us get any more information is figuring out the motive, the why. Why did these children die? Well, let's go down our possible reasons list, starting with the animatronics themselves. We know that from the game itself and what Phone Guy tells us, the animatronics are getting more and more aggressive and unstable, and that there was supposed to be one last private party at the end of the week, before the place shuts down for the foreseeable future. So is it possible that these animatronics are so messed up that by the end of the week, during that private party, they just start flipping out and go on a rampage, killing anything that's too close? Ultimately, while possible, that seems unlikely. Granted, we have very little information on who these dead people are, and they might be adults, but it seems more likely that we're dealing with more dead children. And if they are children, that doesn't make much sense. The game states several times that the animatronics act fine around children. It's adults that they are standoffish and strange towards. Not to mention, in the Save Them minigame, while the dead children are strewn about the restaurant nearby animatronics, the animatronics don't seem to be attacking the children. They seem to not actually be interacting with those children at all. The only one that's moving outside of the puppet and Withered Freddy is Mangle, who's just kind of wandering around aimlessly. And the marionette and Freddy moving in and of itself goes against this idea. If the animatronics are the ones attacking the children, why did the marionette try to get Withered Freddy, another animatronic, to help save them? And another reason on top of all this is one of the endings of this minigame. If you follow the marionette correctly, eventually you'll encounter William Afton, who rushes you, and I guess suplexes an animatronic. I don't know what he does to take down Withered Freddy, but he rushes you and the screen goes black, so he did something, and then we see the words, "You can't." Okay, so simple as. William Afton killed the children at the Dead Child incident, which is why when we were trying to save them, he He says you can't. But then again, why does he do this? Well, maybe he needed more fodder for his experiments. Now, this goes into possible motives for the missing child incident, which we similarly don't have clear or at least confirmed motivations for. And I'm going to say this right at the top because I can hear some of you already being annoying. Arguing about what motive William Afton had to kill children in this franchise is not saying that there is any reasonable justification for doing what William did. Obviously, there is no reasonable or moral justification for what William Afton did, but even the most sick and twisted villains out there have an internal morality. In their own minds, what they are doing makes sense for their reason. So when we're trying to find a motive for William Afton, we're trying to find his reasoning. Why does he do this? Sure, he could just be killing people to kill people, but he's a crazy scientist. Clearly, there's likely going to be a motivation behind his actions. So if you subscribe to the belief that he did the missing child incident in order to see if possession was something that is possible, then this can start to make sense a little bit, and I'm partial to this theory. The idea that maybe after the bite of 83, he saw Golden Freddy moving in some strange ways. So to try to replicate that, he kills children and puts them in animatronic suits to see if he can induce a possession. So maybe that didn't work and he's trying it again at the FNAF 2 location. But then, if that's the case, why is he doing it out in the open? And why is he leaving the bodies strewn about? Wouldn't it make more sense to continue to stuff the bodies into suits? And it's not like they wouldn't fit. Yes, the toys are a little smaller, but they're still big enough to fit a child in their chest cavity. And he was so secretive and careful with the missing child incident, it seems strange that he suddenly flippant and out in the open with the dead child incident, so much so that it closes the restaurant he opened to do this experiment. Well, to be fair, we don't know that he opened this restaurant, and that seems unlikely. A lot of fans think that the FNAF 2 location was opened by Henry. If that's the case, then William Afton doing this to spite Henry and close the location is possible. We know that at this point it's likely William Afton hates Henry Emily and partially blames him for the death of the crying child. Not to say he cares about his children, but it's still an annoyance to him. So it's possible that William Afton was trying to prove that no matter what Henry tries, he cannot get away from William Afton. He will be there to ruin whatever he wants to try to do. But that's also not without its issues, because I don't think Henry Emily owns the FNAF 2 location. When things start going really bad, Phone Guy tells us that they're trying to get into contact with the original restaurant's owner, Fredbear's Family Diner, but they can't even seem to get a hold of him, and it seemed like he could barely remember the name of the restaurant. So it seems like he's not familiar with Henry Emily at all, which leaves us with two options. Either Henry Emily is not the owner of the FNAF 2 location, or he's using some weird pseudonym, which is pretty hard to do legally speaking when you're running a business. It's one thing to get hired for a week under a fake name, but to own and operate a restaurant is a lot trickier. Not to mention, if Charlotte Emily is dead at this point, why is he even reopening another Freddy's? He's got no skin in the game anymore. It doesn't make sense for William to open a restaurant just to get it closed, and it doesn't make sense for Henry to open this restaurant in the first place. At this point, I don't even think either of them owned the FNAF 2 location. Neither William nor Henry owned FNAF 2.
She can take song requests. She can even dispense ice cream.
With all due respect, those aren't the design choices we were curious about, Mr. Afton.
One of the hottest debates in the fandom right now is who is the current CEO of Fazbear Entertainment, at least up until about halfway through Security Breach, where it seems that Glitchtrap begins taking over the online communication and posing as this digital CEO. Who would possibly own and operate this doomed brand in the modern era? Well, that's a great debate to have, especially since in Security Breach, as pointed out by several other theorists, it's an LLC. But at this early in the franchise, it's incorporated. It's a separate business. We can see this on the FNAF 6 paperwork, and we can see it in other trademarks throughout the game. As far as I'm aware, all of this debate has been under the assumption that Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated is a private company with sole or co-ownership. But what if it isn't? What if Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated is a publicly traded business, beholden to shareholders? Quick Business 101 for those who don't know or don't live in the US and don't have to listen to US laws about this. Maybe it's the same laws in other countries, I don't know, I'm American, I barely know how to do research for American business laws. Regardless, in the US, where FNAF is located, there are two major categories of companies, public and private, and a lot of other types of businesses can fall under either category. But the main difference of public and private, and the pertinent idea for this video, is that a private company is completely owned by a single person or select group of people. They have proprietorship of that company, whereas ownership of a public company is derived heavily by its stocks. Anyone can buy stocks of a public company so long as you can afford said stock. And ownership of the publicly traded company company is made up of what is called shareholders, the group of people that own the majority of the stocks of said company. If I buy 1% of Apple stocks, which I do not have the money for, but if I did, then technically I own 1% of Apple. But even if I own that 1%, they don't really gotta listen to me. And legally, as far as I'm aware, you don't have to actually listen to your shareholders. They just reserve the right to stop funding your company. Essentially, and forgive me if I'm getting some of this incorrect, feel free to correct me in the comments below. I'm an English major. This was all new to me and I had to do a lot of research just for this one aspect of the theory. I learned how to write an essay. I don't know how to do any of this. According to the research I did to understand this, essentially, if some big billionaire buys up 60% of my company's stocks, I can use the funds they've allocated into that stock to fund the company and make it bigger and better. It's similar to investing money into a company to help it succeed. But the reason that big billionaire now has some control over me isn't like a legal contract. I don't have to do what he says. The thing is though, he doesn't have to fund my company. If I piss him off too much, he can just leave, sell his stocks, and be gone. And suddenly I don't have all that investment that he put into the company. I'm out of money now. So I really want to do what this guy wants me to do. And that's where shareholders have control over a company. I'm pretty sure. Again, I did like a week of research for this. And if you want to reward that effort, you should drop a subscribe. If you like more thorough investigations on horror games, I do a lot of FNAF, but I'm trying to do not just FNAF moving forward. So back to FNAF. The only time I could find that ownership is directly mentioned in this franchise is that FNAF 2 quote, when they say they're going to try to track down the owner of the original restaurant. And what if that's the key here? There have been a lot of hints toward this throughout the entire franchise and we've just been missing it. The FNAF 1 newspaper mentions seeking out a buyer. The FNAF 2 newspaper mentioning that they're keeping the original animatronics to eventually reopen down the line. If Fazbear's has been a publicly traded company, depending on how they filed for bankruptcy, all of this suddenly makes much more sense. And it comes down to business law. Game theory actually talked about ownership in the past, with the fact that the modern Fazbear games showcase that it's Fazbear Entertainment LLC now, which means that in some way, Scott is definitely paying attention to the types of business law being used in this franchise. So let's do a very quick Freddy Fazbear's timeline to figure out what is going on at FNAF 2 and why. But not about William or Henry or any of those schmucks, about the business side of the company. I mean, we'll mention Henry and William along the way, but we're focusing on the business side of things. So I present to you the business timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's. Sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, William and Henry establish and own the private company Fredbear's Family Diner to great success. They want funding to create bigger and better things and expand the brand to more people, but they can't afford it with the money they're getting just from Fredbear's alone. They need funding. So they establish a separate business entity, Fazbear Entertainment. This is why the name is different from Fredbear to Freddy Fazbear. Separate business entities. It's a win-win scenario. Either this new venture is successful and they're wealthy beyond their wildest dreams, or at the worst case scenario, it goes fully under, Fredbear's Family Diner is fine. That is a separate business entity. Fazbear Entertainment goes under, we wash our hands and declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy, selling all of those assets back to the market. I should go into this as well because this is incredibly important for this theory, surprisingly. There's two main types of bankruptcy you can declare in the US as a business. There are more types, but the two main ones that are important for today's video are Chapter 7 bankruptcy and Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Chapter 7 bankruptcy is essentially a sell-all process, where whoever is in debt sells all of their non-exempt assets from the company to use that money to pay back who they're in debt to, and typically the remaining amount is forgiven. It's basically, we fucked up, here's everything we did, and that's as much cash as we can give you back, see you never. Chapter 11 is more often used in businesses where there's an attempt to continue the business after bankruptcy. There's an agreement made between all of the debtors and debtees. Essentially, the people who owe the money go, hey, here's all the stuff you've invested into the company and all of the assets we bought with the money you gave us. You can hold on to that, we'll reorganize the company, and maybe we can reach a new agreement later down the line. It's a way to maintain a business through a bankruptcy. Hi, this is VoiceOver Riley. It's probably going to sound a little better. Anyway, I was editing this and I just realized, according to uscourts.gov, a Chapter 11 bankruptcy is frequently referred to as a reorganization bankruptcy. This is important because the FNAF 2 newspaper, and I just noticed this in editing, literally says the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company. This newspaper is literally directly saying they're doing a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, meaning Scott was thinking about things like this all the way back then. Either that or this is a crazy coincidence. It's incredibly important for this theory, I promise, and it'll be important later. Eventually, William and Henry find enough investors and funding for first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to open, and Freddy's and the gang are legally owned by the major shareholders of the company, the investors putting the most money in, not being legally owned by William or Henry. They only retain ownership of Fredbear's Family Diner and its characters, the separate business entity. Then the Bite of 83 happens, and eventually Fredbear's Family Diner is shut down because of it. At this point, no way would the shareholders want the public image of Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated to be besmirched by declaring ownership of the company to either of the businessmen who just had a public children's death happen in the middle of their restaurant. Sure, they can continue to be the minds behind the creation of these animatronics and the engineers, but they are not touching a leadership role of Fazbear Entertainment. William then begins creating a separate business venture, Circus Baby's Pizza World, and through it needs to create a new business entity, Afton Robotics, again seeking out funding. It's my belief that William Afton, after seeing the Bite of 83, either because he noticed Fredbear acting strange or just wanted to experiment with the concept of life, wants to recreate that bite with the Funtime animatronics. He seeks out additional shareholders for that new business venture, and this is where we get that sister location cutscene from. It was an application to the shareholders to show the proof of concept of Circus Baby, but of course that restaurant goes under before it ever happens. Now there's just a roster of Funtime animatronics that William is stuck with, because this business entity was attached to his name, Afton Robotics. He's the proprietor. At this point in the timeline, Henry either disappears not to be heard from again, or William Afton pins the next thing he does on Henry to get Henry arrested. Depends on what you believe. But William Afton, still wanting to experiment with possession, does the missing child incident to see if anything would happen. It's not his business anymore, so it really doesn't matter if it gets shut down. Just put the dead children in the animatronics and see if they possess them. But alas, William doesn't notice any possession, and within a year, that place shuts down. But something worse happens. Since Fazbear Entertainment Incorporated was set up as a separate business entity owned majorly by the shareholders, when Freddy Fazbear Pizza goes under, if those shareholders decided on a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, William Afton would no longer retain ownership to any of the assets of the company. Those are now owned by the investors while they reorganize the business trying to move forward. To put it simply, William Afton lost access to his experiments. The Freddy's animatronics, holding children's bodies, are held securely away from them. He needs to study them to see if any kind of possession will work, but he can't get any access to them without an active Freddy's location. So after a year or so, he approaches these shareholders with a grand idea for a new Freddy's that can get them out of bankruptcy and be safer than ever before. William promises a criminal database scanning on all of the animatronics, state-of-the-art security. Nothing could ever go wrong at this place, and to sweeten the deal, he just happens to have a spare balloon boy from Circus Baby's Pizza World, never before seen by the public. They could even throw that in as a brand new animatronic. The shareholders agree, and the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is opened. Finally, William Afton can observe and experiment on those older animatronics again, occasionally taking pieces of them and attaching them to the toys to see if they can get any reaction. But are they possessed? He needs to see if they'll act strangely. But after some time, they're still not reacting, and William Afton grows desperate. Knowing if this restaurant shuts down again, he will once again lose access to these observations. Something has to make them move. If they're possessed, something needs to trigger a reaction. Why not remind them how they got there? As a Hail Mary to absorb any sort of motion, William puts on the old Spring Bonnie suit that he killed them in and kills a new roster of children right in front of them. That got a reaction. As he's doing this, the marionette goes off its track to get the old Freddy animatronic for help. Save them, it begs. And William Afton sees the marionette and that old Freddy animatronic marching toward him. And in that moment, he got everything he's ever wanted. Undeniable proof that possession exists and can be manipulated. But it's not without its consequences. The animatronics have been driven mad at this point, and by the time of the last private party of the FNAF 2 location, they're too erratic. One of them even attacking an employee, severing his frontal lobe. The Freddy's location closes down, and once again, the animatronics are kept for safekeeping. But the toys are scrapped. They don't want to be associated with William's new creations, which is fine by William. Those toys have several parts of the old original animatronics, and he can start to get to work. This even explains Follow Me if it's true, because the next time a Freddy's location opens and closes, William Afton knows that those animatronics will get locked away if left for too long. So in that moment, he's desperate enough to rush in and try to disassemble them himself before they're taken away. way. I think this is a perfectly rational explanation for the DCI, the Bite of 87, Follow Me, and the intro for Sister Location. And I think it slots in perfectly for the timeline of William and Henry. I'm so confident about this, but what do you think? Do you think the DCI was a way to try and provoke a reaction from the animatronics in the little time that William had access to them? Or am I looking way too much into the legal nuances of fake businesses? Secret of the Mimic is an incredibly dense game. Every corner hides something worth speculating on, even if it might not amount to much in the grand scheme of things. But with all the huge lore drops like the Prototype Pizzeria or M1 versus M2, or even Twink Death Moon, some weirdness of this game gets lost in the cracks. For example, the power of the facility. Why is this entire factory powered by glowing golden goo? What's the deal with Edwin Murray's weird goo? Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Also, cat tower. It's hard to tell because he's a black cat, but not only is Mark on top, Casey's in the little hole there. I'm thinking of getting a hanging cat tower for this door. I think that would look really nice, especially since there's nothing on the door already, but I don't know. So when I say Edwin Murray's weird goo, what do I mean by that? Well, several times throughout Secret of the Mimic, we have to turn on power for a certain area. If it's only a small object, typically it's just a generator, but for larger parts of the facility, we need to do one of these puzzles. These pipe minigames require you to make a specific path so that the goo from the right side of the puzzle can squirm its way through to the left side of the puzzle and then power on the facility. But this golden goo flows throughout the entire facility, in every power station we find, and has several massive tubes of it being directly redirected into Edwin's personal house. So what is this golden goo? Why was it off in the first place? And why does any of that matter? Well, to figure out what it is, we need to go to its source and figure out where it's coming from. And luckily, the game makes that very easy. About halfway through the game, we visit the Doll Hospital, otherwise known as the recycling center of Murray's Costume Manor, which, another fun Faz fact, in Five Nights at Freddy's, Edwin Murray canonically invented the concept of recycling. I love the weird, in case you're not in the know, there's so many like weird world facts about FNAF. The fact that bears went extinct, and it's hinted that Fazbear Entertainment hunted them to extinction because they kept going after pizza. There's so many weird world facts that are just fun little tidbits. Regardless, in this area, the overhead recording of Edwin Murray tells us that MCM takes discarded materials or things they no longer find useful or necessary and turns them into new stuff. However, that's not exactly what we're seeing in this recycling center. It seems like costumes that are usable, like Captain Springlock, are seen and either repaired or cleaned, but the ones that are unsalvageable are instead crushed and thrown in a furnace, a massive melter filtering the molten sludge into nearby containers. And theoretically, this is still recycling, right? That's how you recycle metals. You melt it down, you make new metal, and you do it somewhere else. Granted, I think that's basically Damascus, which isn't that sturdy, which might explain why Edwin Murray's animatronics aren't that good. But regardless, wouldn't you know that the sludge in this facility looks just like the golden goo? So the thing powering this entire facility is glowing golden molten metal. Interesting. Hey, that kind of sounds like Remnant is a bit of a buzzword in Five Nights at Freddy's anymore. It's as unexplained as a concept as it is integral to the plotline. So we'll unfortunately have to go over and discuss what it is and if it possibly could be in this game. The main books that actually delve into the mechanics of Remnant are the epilogues in the Fazbear Fright short story collections. In there, it's explained that Remnant is essentially a material of two materials. When a soul possesses metal, that metal is considered Remnant. We also learn through the books and the games that Remnant can be heated in order to be made malleable and injectable into other objects. We see in the third book of the Silver Eyes trilogy, The Fourth Closet, that William Afton essentially melts together the original 4 animatronics and keeps them at a super hot temperature to extract molten metal out of it and inject it into the sister location animatronics to power them up and make them more controllable. So the books establish that yes, Remnant can be used to power machinery, but can it really be used to power an entire facility? Well, for that, it's useful to look at a theory we discussed earlier this year, Remnantplex. Now, I have a whole video delving into Remnantplex and its implications, but I think it's most useful to actually go over to She's Always Nervous's channel, since she is the one who came up with the theory, and her video goes much more in depth on the mechanics of Remnantplex and the logic behind it. But the very brief overview for the purposes of today's video is that Remnantplex posits that the entirety of the security breach Pizzaplex is, at least in part, powered by Remnant, the scooper in the basement being either found or created by the people who made the Pizzaplex. And Vanessa was hired because she had so much weirdness around her. She was sort of the perfect person to manipulate, bring on board, and have her grab those stragglers, grab employees that no one's going to miss, kill them in a way that would create Remnant, and extract that remnant into the scooper to fill through the rest of the Pizzaplex. That way you have a very, very cost-effective power source, and your animatronics will be more lifelike than any other animatronics possibly could be, because they're literally powered by human souls. This also feeds into the idea that Burntrap is slowly being healed in order for Glitchtrap to enter that body. We hear throughout the game several times that there's a lot of power being drawn back into the underground pizzeria, and it never quite makes sense because all that power is only powering like a couple lights that have generators and maybe one charging pod, so it's a little strange. But if the power of the Pizzaplex is Remnant, then the idea that Vanny is drawing Remnant down into the pizzeria to infuse into Burntrap's body to make a better host for Glitchtrap makes a lot of sense and adds up with the things we've learned about Remnant throughout this franchise. So theoretically, if Remnantplex is true, Remnant not only could power a facility and still have the effectiveness of Remnant, but it could also be being redirected into a specific experiment. Now wait a minute, why is that exactly what's happening in Secret of the Mimic? So this stuff kind of sounds like Remnant, and looking at Security Breach, it can power a facility like Remnant, but if this is Remnant, why is it being redirected like Security Breach? I mentioned this earlier, but one of the strangest moments of all of Secret of the Mimic for me personally was that when you approach Murray's personal mansion, the underground tunnels that take you there show like 8+ massive tubes, all redirecting this molten remnant directly into the house from below. But we never get to see where it's going. We just know it is going there. So the big question would be, who is redirecting all of this goo, and why? Now, straight away, I don't think the redirection is because of M2. At first, part of me liked this theory, the idea that M2 was shutting off power stations to redirect as much remnant back into the manor as possible to better fix its own body. But if M2 really is trying to amass remnant, they're really bad at it. There are so many bodies in Murray's costume manor that were definitely killed by M2 and were just left lying around. Knowing how remnant typically works, they would have had to either have been killed right next to an animatronic or within an animatronic, and hopefully they would go on to possess said animatronic. And then you could throw that entire animatronic with the body into the furnace and boom, more remnant for the pile. But M2 kind of just kills people and puts them into a fabric suit. It's not the most effective way to get remnant. Not to mention, the best time to kill someone in this facility to collect their remnant would be when they're wearing a springlock suit. And as we see in the game, M2 doesn't recognize springlock wearers as people. When you're wearing a springlock suit, M2 looks at you and just thinks you're another animatronic. In fact, there's a chance that it'll wave at you. So the most opportune time to get remnant, M2 literally can't do. Its programming is not that complex. So if it's not M2, was the collection of remnant originally done by Edwin before he died? After all, we know that he was tirelessly working on something by the time that M2 killed him in his office. Was all of that experimentation working on Remnant? And if so, was he maybe trying to fully bring back Fiona, not just recreate her in a robot? All of this seems very possible, but it also wraps back into the biggest problem with this theory. The same reason why I'm not fully sold on this theory myself. The logic of why Edwin would want to do this is there, and there's evidence to help support it. The how Edwin would do this kind of isn't. Now, to be fair, as many comments pointed out to me on the podcast where I also floated this idea, we don't know definitively how much remnant can come from one body. But this is a lot of remnant, so in my mind, dead bodies. And if that's true, if this is a lot of dead people, where in the hell did Edwin get access to that? Like, you could argue that a few employees died here and there at MCM. After all, it was a very unsafe facility. But look at this remnant vat, and look at these tubes that are everywhere. This is so much remnant. This is like tons, metric tons of remnant. Some people have suggested that possibly all of the Fall Fest fire refuse was obtained and retrieved by MCM and then recycled, which is possibly the best explanation I've ever heard for this much remnant, but that's still a stretch. Why was he allowed to collect a bunch of dead bodies from an accident, and then how did they transport, and did that even work that way? So if this was all the theory was, I would leave it at that. I would leave it at, look, it does look and act a lot like Remnant, but I think it's unlikely that Edwin would get this many bodies. I really want to see if somebody can find evidence to prove that bodies went into this Remnant, because imagine how much this would clear up the early timeline if this was Remnant. One of the biggest questions of the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline is where William started, how William Afton came to discover Remnant, and why he started to do the things he did. This would answer that question. William is already a shitty guy by the time of Secret of the Mimic, clearly. But he just bought this entire facility, and going through it, not only would he find robots that recreate personalities to give a facade of immortality, but he would have found massive tons worth of glowing goop that, according to Edwin's notes, function in a way similar to the material of a soul. Because look, just because we don't find notes on it, clearly Edwin would have been taking notes on Remnant. It's like how we don't get access to the alt Fazbear designs or the alt puppet designs. But not only would he have received massive amounts of Remnant in tubes, but at the same time, he would be receiving the bunkers that eventually get turned into sister location, which would mean, in this exact moment of the timeline, William would receive the means, the ammunition, and the information to create Circus Baby's Pizza World and begin experimenting with Remnant on the fun times. He'd learn about it here, about Remnant, immortality. He'd have space to make his workshop, and this seedy, awful businessman could then begin pursuing immortality to the point of insanity. Frankly, this would be incredible evidence for Elizabeth Afton being the first to die in the timeline, and would therefore explain why in FNAF 4, her bedroom is empty. But as nicely as this would fit into the timeline and give clear motive for William to go insane and begin killing people, I can't think of a good source for all this Remnant, unless one person can make way more Remnant than we thought. So I kind of leave this theory with a request to you guys. Can anybody find any good explanation or evidence for Edwin to be amassing this amount of bodies, besides Fallfest's fire being so tragic that there were so many people dead that he was able to also wrap into a big bag and dump into his furnace and not have the families of the workers want to claim the bodies? Because even if Fallfest killed like 100 people, why did the police let Edwin collect the bodies? I don't see a great time or reason for Edwin to have that many bodies. But if you can, please let me know, because this would be such a good piece for the timeline if this is Remnant. Secret of the Mimic put a lot of what we thought we knew about Five Nights at Freddy's into orbit, exploding long-held theories and completely changing how we see characters who we frankly know very little of, but thought we knew a lot about. Many people think that these are retcons, but truthfully, very little, if anything at all, has been retconned in Secret of the Mimic. We're just having to come to terms with the fact that we know for sure very, very, very little about this franchise. Most of all, the business aspect of Fazbear Entertainment, something that we've had to grasp at straws to even know a little bit about. But with this most recent FNAF game, we got a whole lot of details all about the business side of things and how these restaurants got established in the first place, especially how the animatronics and the characters about them came to be. But a lot of people are walking away from Secret of the Mimic assuming that William and Henry were frauds the whole time, that Edwin made everything and they just stole it from him. But is that the case? I don't think so. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. Secret of the Mimic takes place in Murray's Costume Manor, a company run by Edwin Murray, the main guy everyone's talking about. He's an inventor and costume maker that was contracted by Fazbear to create something. It's never directly stated exactly what the project entailed or covered, but several emails and audio logs imply that it was big. So big that it could take a dying company and give it enough money to keep going back to normal.
I just need to finish the new Fazbear project and then everyone will come back. we can get back to normal.
But throughout the entire game, there's very little to actually hint what the Fazbear Project is. That is until you get to the parachute.exe ending, when you go underneath the facility into research and development, where all of the Fazbear Project is being held so far. Inside we see this giant Freddy head, and then an entire fake pizzeria, befitted with several animatronics, 4 Springlock characters, Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Monty, and Bub, and 4 prototype Fazbear characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. And suddenly, this massive project and the massive budget behind it is starting to make a lot more sense. I believe that the actual Fazbear Project was a restaurant showroom. Like how the Big Top showroom is a big fake circus, the Storytime showroom is a big fake Storytime theater, and the Birthday showroom has this whole present birthday themed area. I think the Fazbear Project was going to be a mutually beneficial pizzeria showroom, where he would be making copies for Fazbear, but he would get to keep this base fake area to show other clients. But if Edwin was making all these animatronics, does that mean that Edwin was the one who created the original Freddy Fazbear's gang, the Springlocks, and everything else we know from the early timeline? Well, not quite, and that's for a few reasons. First of all, these prototype animatronics are unfinished and Edwin is likely dead. Even the mostly finished Springlock suits have a big old prototype stamped on the back of their head. And from the audio logs, we know those designs are likely the ones that were changed. Not to mention, even with these prototype Fazbear animatronics, there's nothing to say that these are the ones that were used by Fazbear. This game takes place in 1979, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened in 1983. There's plenty of time to make new animatronics and not use these half-built prototypes. But if that's the case, what exactly is going on here? What does Fazbear get out of this project? And why was Edwin Murray's business doomed to fail, mimic or no mimic? Well, we hear from quite a few sources in the game that Edwin was a pretty good inventor, but an awful businessman.
Ed, you're not going to want to hear this, but there's a lot of grumbling on the work floor. You have a lot of new ideas and new projects coming in, but the staff can't keep up with all your changes. Your creative energy is amazing, and I love you for it. But I think you need to step back a little and focus on one project at a time.
And this makes a lot more sense when we find out that Edwin Murray isn't the one who made Murray's Costume Manor successful in the first place. Edwin Murray was always kind of a kooky inventor type of person, and his father, Edwin Sr., is the businessman who made Murray's Costume Manor what it is today. Or at least he's the guy who made it what it was when Edwin inherited it, because Edwin Sr. unfortunately died unexpectedly.
He's gone and now everyone is asking me what to do, and I don't know anything. I can't run a company. I'm not ready. I can't fill his shoes. He knew it. Everyone knew it. The company is going to collapse and they're all going to hate me.
Ed, you'll figure it out. Just take a deep breath. It's your company now. Your dad believed in you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left it to you.
I guess so.
If you could change anything you wanted, what would it be?
Maybe rebrand? We could start making some of my inventions for real.
This new direction Edwin was taking the company is what led it to massive success and eventually ultimate failure. Let me introduce to you the Cleanovac, the invention that built an empire all on its own. Similar to the books, Edwin Murray made a vacuum cleaner that was so good it funded literally everything he did after it. Think about how successful this thing is in-game. They literally built a massive golden-esque statue of it in the middle of the showroom lobby. But every other invention Edwin set out to make for Murray's Costume Manor that we hear about failed spectacularly. There's a hidden room off near the beginning of the game that handles the returns the company was dealing with, and inside we get several different letters about what inventions were getting returned. Dear Mr. Murray, we bought your magic coat rack last May. It was an amazing addition to our home, but lately it seems to change size at random. One morning I came out to find all my coats flung across the room and the coat rack 10 feet tall. Can you send us instructions on how to fix this? We're afraid someone might get hurt. Sincerely, B. Wyatt. Dear MCM, my husband is a steelworker and recently he was moved to the night shift. He tried your stay-up latte and it worked wonders for about 2 weeks. He is now in the hospital because of your drink. You will be hearing from our lawyers. R. Quinn. Dear Mr. Murray & Co., my child loves your Jest cereal. However, the pranks inside are extremely inappropriate. The hand buzzer paralyzed our dog Fido. We are never buying this cereal ever again. Sincerely, E. Guerrero. Dear Mr. Murray, I'm writing this to complain about my purchase of the Mushmen music machine. It learned my child's musical tastes, but it also imitated everything it heard. TV commercials, blenders, and even private conversations between my husband and me. I'm returning it immediately. Sincerely, A. Dumas. The Cleanovac might have been a flash-in-a-bottle success, but every single other thing Edwin created seemed to fail. Why is that? Well, we have a few reasons. As mentioned before, Fiona brought up that he's trying too many things at once. He goes from one project to the next, making up these new ideas and trying to make them on the spot, but not spending enough time with them to hone and craft them into something good. And part of the reason why he does this is because he's obsessed with making his next big thing. The Cleanovac was massively successful, so much so that it drove Edwin crazy he couldn't even get close to that again. Listen to how he sounds in one of David's birthday tapes.
Just give me a minute. I had the best idea.
Okay,
This is the one. Bigger than the Cleanovac.
As Edwin is inventing something that should be a joyous and creative process, his main thought is, this will be better than the Cleanovac. Even in Moon.exe, the prototype Cleanovac triggers the dialogue, his greatest success and his greatest failure. Because the massive success of the Cleanovac is what drove Edwin to bury himself into work, so much so that he would overwork himself, burn out, and lose any quality control, only creating mounds of crap. And it's this distraction and overwork and burying himself that leads everything else in his life to fall to ruin. It's what eventually leads to David's death, but it's also what makes the company start having other problems like safety and quality of life. We see this in logs like, theater, one more injury. Ralph went to the hospital last night. That suit is going to be the death of one of us. One more injury and I'm out of here. I mean it this time. I can't take it. Barb, I swear, if I hear that song one more time, I'm going to tear that dolly off her hinges. I have no clue how much longer I can take it here. Okay, so we've established Edwin is not the best inventor, but he's also the worst businessman. What does this have to do with Fazbear, though? Well, if the business wasn't failing enough already, William Afton is here to dig its grave. Fazbear Entertainment had seemingly been dealing with Murray's Costume Manor for some time now. It's likely that if Fredbear's Family Diner ever used felt suits in their restaurant, then Murray's Costume Manor was likely the one who designed them. After all, that seemed to be their specialty before changing directions. But at the end of the day, Murray's Costume Manor is, in a way, a competition to Fazbear Entertainment. They're both making fictional characters that people are supposed to love. And apparently in William Afton's eyes, there's only room in the world for two companies that make robotic animals that people like. As Murray's Costume Manor begins to fail, William Afton sees an opportunity to snuff out one of his biggest competitors for good, in a way that would retain all of the assets to Fazbear and make it a hell of a lot cheaper to get Edwin to make stuff for him. So he reaches out to one of the upper echelon employees at MCM, with an offer no one would refuse. Staff contacts. We are almost there. I need the rest of the Murray staff contact info. The sooner the better. You get that for me, and I can sweeten the deal. How would you like to manage one of the new franchise locations? WA. Not only was there already a deal to buy out this employee, but if he can get the Murray contact info list, then he'll let this employee run one of the restaurants of Fazbear Entertainment. And this works. William Afton starts poaching several employees from Murray's Costume Manor. We see a lot of emails about people getting offers to work for Fazbear, and they get bonuses if they bring other employees with them. So not only is MCM failing and money is drying up and the working conditions are being terrible, but more and more employees are quitting for better deals with Fazbear Entertainment. The company is falling out from underneath Edwin. It's not even hard to get some of these employees over. Not only is the company failing, but one of the only things that held MCM together was how tight-knit the employees were with the upper management, and that's fallen apart too. Since Fiona's death, somebody overheard Edwin talking to M1 in research and development, but when they heard Fiona's voice, they assumed that Fiona was still alive because of it, which then led everyone to believe that Edwin and Fiona faked Fiona's death for the insurance money. Sure, that's a terrible thing to do, but imagine you're these employees. Your upper management has treated you like family for the longest time. You think you're friends with the upper management, and then you grieve the death of one of them. only to find out that they've lied to you. She's not actually dead, they just wanted more money, and they put you through that emotional turmoil for nothing. I'd hate them too. I wouldn't want to work for them either. Now, Fiona did die, but that's not what everyone began to think. And whether it was to rub salt in the wound, to guarantee a waste of money, or to guarantee a closure of the business, near the end of the Fazbear project, more and more change requests start being sent over. Things that would force Edwin to redo months worth of work and completely abandon the original designs Fiona had made for these animatronics. Things look bleak. It is getting to a point where Edwin can't fix this and might not even be able to finish this mythical Fazbear project that was supposed to save the company. And it's at that lowest point where William Afton swoops in to save the day, as if he wasn't the orchestrator of the downfall of the company, something that at this point Edwin had figured out. We only get the second half of the message that William Afton sent to Edwin, but it still helps us to form a clear picture of its meaning. Software development and the entire MCM catalog. We would love to keep you on as a lead engineer. Although we now technically own the land, we would never touch the house your parents built. We feel this offer has been more than fair, considering how far behind you are. It's just too much for you to handle alone. We are waiting for your response, William Afton. William Afton offers to buy all of Murray's Costume Manor, the assets, the software, and the rest of the workers, even Edwin himself as a lead engineer, including the Fazbear project and all of the unfinished animatronics within. So then, William is a fraud, right? Edwin made every Fazbear animatronic, or at least started them, and then William tricked the company, ruined it, and bought it up. Well, again, no, because there's one character I've neglected to mention so far, and that's Henry Emily. Henry is a bit of an anomaly here, as he's only directly mentioned, as far as I can find, once in this entire game, but it's in an incredibly important audio log.
Journal entry. I got the change order from Hen last night. None of this makes sense. I'm almost done. Why change it now? It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
Something very important is being implied in this audio log, a relationship. Edwin refers to Henry as Hen, and says that they've been doing something like they always do, implying it's been happening for a long time. This audio log is implying that Edwin and Henry were very close, nickname basis even. And it was around this time that I got an email for the Freddy Fazbear Pizza podcast, the weekly podcast I host on this very channel, which you can find right here. But the email was from Sylvie, which had a lot of other information, but the thing I want to bring up right now is this line. I think using the funds that the Cleanovac gave him, Edwin hired on Henry, who went on to create Chica and the spring locks as we see them in game, even if they are Fiona's designs, just for Afton to poach him as MCM was crashing post Fiona's death. And when I read that, everything started to click. Most theorists have agreed for a very long time, as far back as FNAF 6 even, that Henry wasn't always part of Fazbear Entertainment. Rather, Henry had his own restaurant, possibly with Chica or with the Mediocre Melodies, and eventually merged with William Afton to form the Fazbear we know today, Fredbear's Family Diner, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He was the animatronic genius that William needed to hire on board to make this project work. And all of this new information with Secret of the Mimic fits perfectly into that main theory. Henry wasn't working for his own business. He was an employee at Murray's Costume Manor. Just like in his other book iterations, Henry Emily is a genius with animatronics, able to make robots that no one's ever seen before. And that's why every Springlock suit we see in Secret of the Mimic has that signature Henry jawline, just like the Rockstars. Separated jaws with iron bars in between them. The Springlocks were made by Henry. That's why sometimes the suits didn't look like Fiona's designs, like we see in the Chica's Party World log. This wasn't a one-man show, this was a team. Fiona made the designs, Henry made the closest animatronics he could, and Edwin made the crazy inventions that funded it all. Those three people ran this company. But then what happened? Well, it's important to note that the mailbox we get the staff contacts note in is in one of the highest offices in MCM, just outside of Edwin's office in MCM, implying that only an executive had access to this log. And we know Edwin and Fiona were executives, but neither of them would have wanted to sell out the entire company, so I think this is telling us that Henry Emily was the third executive at Murray's Costume Manor, and Henry was the big betrayal that led to the downfall of the company. But was it out of malice? I don't think so. Henry Emily saw the writing on the wall. The company was failing before William took any employees away, and Henry Emily has a daughter named Charlotte he has to look after. He needs to make sure he can support and pay for what she needs. So if you're Henry and you're working at this company, and suddenly William Afton approaches you, offers you a very lucrative job as co-creator of any of the animatronics Fazbear produces, and even lets you manage one of the franchise locations, that's an offer you can't refuse. So he joins Fazbear. His talent and creations join with him, and together they make the animatronics we know and love. It was likely that Henry was the one creating those prototype Freddy animatronics in research and development. He created them all along, at first under the company of Murray's Costume Manor, but eventually under the company as Fazbear Entertainment. It makes so much sense, and it really puts a new meaning on a line that we all know and love from Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator.
There's this monster that I unwillingly helped to create.
He knew he was helping to make a business, but he didn't know what that business would become. I am literally so confident in this theory. It makes so much sense, and I don't think I'm the only one who's thinking this. I would assume that most theorists are going to come to a similar conclusion. It finally explains how Fazbear originally started in a way that doesn't feel like a retcon. Sure, we didn't know about Edwin, but we always had a feeling Henry came from somewhere else first. And this game is finally giving us the evidence to show us that that's likely the case. But what do you think? Have I lost it? Am I crazy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. One of the biggest mysteries still surrounding the FNAF timeline is what exactly is Fall Fest? When exactly did it happen, and why does it matter at all? Well, looking over the information we've gotten from Secret of the Mimic, Help Wanted and Help Wanted 2, and a couple other sources, I think we have a pretty good idea of it, as long as we put it all together and really try to figure it out. Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. The first time we directly heard about Fall Fest was from Help Wanted 1, where the Curse of Dreadbear DLC showed us the Fall Fest of 83 lobby. It was in this open field with hills all around, a barn to our left, and a lake in front of us. Also the FNAF 4 house on the hill, giving us more information about where this might be located. But something to always keep in mind about Help Wanted 1 is that it is an in-universe game. So anything we see from it, while we should take it into account, we do need to double check if it's at all accurate. That in mind, some of the various minigames we see definitely seem like they'd be a part of Fall Fest. Maybe not things like the one where you're walking down the hallway of the FNAF 4 house, but seeing the plushies in the pumpkin patch and seeing that Foxy ride, those feel like they could be Fall Fest attractions, especially the maze. Whether or not you're actually chased by Grim Foxy. But the setting is really all we learn about Fall Fest in Help Wanted 1. Help Wanted 2, however, is a bit more enlightening. We get more merch about Fall Fest, showing us that it at least started as early as 1970, according to this poster. We learn about more animatronics that were at Fall Fest, like Mystic Hippo and Carney. We see more events at Fall Fest, like the Faz Blaster and the Carousel, and we see that Fazbear branding seems to be rampant among Fall Fest. The strangest thing of all, though, is that most of the minigames about Fall Fest end in a fire, which seems important. Much of the event, though, is still shrouded in mystery. We still get very little direct information about Fall Fest. It's just more so being acknowledged that it happened at all. And then Secret of the Mimic came out. This is the first FNAF game that really directly addressed what Fall Fest could be, and even then, it's not that direct. We learned that Murray's Costume Manor was heavily involved with Fall Fest, to the point that Fiona, the wife of Edwin Murray, decided that it was important for her to go to Fall Fest and make sure everything was being run correctly. It seems like Murray's Costume Manor wasn't just providing attractions and costumes, but rather possibly running the whole thing. And we finally get an answer about that fire from Fall Fest, albeit not a direct one. But it's about as direct as any information in this franchise gets. From the audio logs, we learn that Fiona died at the Fall Fest she went to go help with. That, paired from the fact that in Moon.exe, there's a burnt bridal statue, seemingly representing Fiona, with a Fall Fest snow globe at her feet. This, and some other evidence sprinkled throughout the game, make it pretty safe to assume that Fiona went to Fall Fest, there was a tragic fire, and she died. Not only is this a horrible tragedy, but this, to an extent, set in motion the Mimic's entire storyline. Sure, it seems like Edwin was working on the Mimic before Fiona died, but it's her death that prompts him to use the Mimic as a pseudo-babysitter, which then leads down the path of making her act like Fiona, and then, David dies, and all of this falls into place after Fiona's death at Fall Fest. But what matters most here is from the evidence we have, it seems like the Fall Fest was under the jurisdiction of Murray's Costume Manor, and in a fire, Fiona died. We can assume that Fall Fest ended after that, right? Not only was Murray's Costume Manor bleeding money at that point, but I can't imagine that Fiona died at the Fall Fest, and then a year later, Edwin was like, let's do it again. Public trust aside, it seems like it'd be a sore spot, no? So then, what's the deal? That's pretty much all the information we have on Fall Fest. There's some speculation we had before Secret of the Mimic, but that's pretty much made redundant with evidence that either bolstered that speculation or denied it. Like the fact that in the Dark Carnival DLC of Special Delivery, you play through a section that really feels like Fall Fest, but it's filled with fire hazards, implying there was a fire. After Help Wanted 2 and Secret of the Mimic, duh, yeah, there was a fire. But still, the overarching question remains. Why does this matter? How does it even fit into the timeline? As far as why it would matter, it seems like the Mimic has some personal trauma related with Fall Fest. Whether that be inherited programmed memories of Fiona or what, it's hard to tell. But if Help Wanted is a creation of the Mimic, and if Help Wanted 2 is in any way influenced by the Mimic, we get continuous depictions of Fall Fest next to fires. Every Help Wanted 2 minigame ends in a fire. In the maze in Help Wanted and in Princess Quest, that maze is populated by a Foxy that's on fire. I mean, going another layer deep, you could argue Foxy is a representation of Fiona. We know for a fact she created the Roxy character, it seems likely she created the Foxy character too. So how pertinent is it that in a Fall Fest minigame, there's a Foxy on fire? It seems like art therapy almost for the Mimic. Well, combine all of this with one other thing we learn about in Murray's Costume Manor. That being Fazbear's business practices, and what they did to Murray's Costume Manor in the 70s. Throughout the game, we get several emails and audio logs about what Fazbear was doing to Murray's Costume Manor as a business, and either Edwin had gone fully paranoid at the end of destroying his own business, or William Afton was pretty directly orchestrating the downfall of Murray's Costume Manor. Frankly, the latter is more likely. I'm honestly very willing to accept that William Afton was personally destroying this company. It seems pretty in character that before he was even a child-murdering evil guy, he was already doing slimy business tactics. Like, he's not necessarily a child killer yet, but he is an evil, greedy, manipulative capitalist. Sorry, that was redundant. I could have just said capitalist. We know Murray's Costume Manor was struggling for cash, and around the end of their run, they accepted a massive contract from Fazbear. Build us this big fake pizzeria, put a bunch of animatronics in it, and we'll call it a day. But as they kept working on this contract, to get that big payday, they kept being stalled more and more by Fazbear, getting orders to change things or undo things. And the contract went on so long that they went under before they could ever finish it. Not to mention that William Afton was actively poaching employees from Murray's Costume Manor as this went on, promising higher wages and better positions. And just when they were at their lowest and about to fully dissolve, William Afton swoops in, offers to buy up the entire company, give Murray a position as engineer, and let them keep working as they were, retaining all assets and projects under the Fazbear brand. It was a way to not only knock out a competitor, but gain a powerful asset. It was a savvy business practice, which is why it was evil. And if Fall Fest is an MCM subsidiary, then we do in fact have a timeline. One that actually makes a lot of sense, because at that point, Fazbear Entertainment would be the ones who suddenly owned Fall Fest after everything went down. So let's go over the full timeline of Fall Fest and see how it fits into the grander FNAF timeline. Fall Fest was one of the best ideas that Murray's Costume Manor had ever come up with, holding an annual festival that not only built community around them and built public trust in the company, but it's the perfect way to showcase their inventions and creations for potential buyers and investors. After all, if they have this incredibly successful festival that they hold every year with their own technology, you can too if you make a purchase. It's a win-win-win. And it was perfect for a time until it wasn't. Until one fateful day when the Fall Fest had a very public and very tragic fire that resulted in at least the death of Fiona Murray. Quick aside, some people have argued that the fire at Fall Fest was on purpose. Either Edwin planned it for insurance fraud not knowing Fiona would be there, or William Afton did it to ruin the company. But honestly, I've looked at both of these arguments and I don't think they hold much water. After all, the William Afton angle is strange. He was already crippling the company before committing arson, It seems like an unnecessary risk. And then as far as Edwin's insurance fraud thing, the only evidence for that is the one message where somebody mentions hearing Fiona talking at night after she supposedly died and questions why he would fake her death if it was possibly for insurance fraud. But I think that message isn't meant to imply Edwin did the fire on purpose, but rather imply that the employees don't trust Edwin anymore because they can hear M1 in the basement. Regardless, there does not seem to be enough evidence for me to believe that this fire was set on purpose. And if the most obvious answer is that it was just an accident, then I'm gonna go with that until proven otherwise. Regardless, this fire definitively soured the image of Fall Fest. Even if public trust didn't immediately erode overnight, it's highly improbable that Edwin would the very next year run it again. So, like many aspects of Murray's costume manor, the Fall Fest faded to obscurity, and over the next few years it finally bankrupted. At least, until new management came into town. When Fazbear bought up all of Murray's costume manor, it also obtained all of its subsidiaries, which would have included Fall Fest, which meant Fazbear now had the very same opportunity to do what Murray's costume manor was doing: build public trust, build brand recognition, and show off their shiny new technology. And what better timing than about a decade or so after the initial tragedy, when all the dust is settled, to line it up with the brand new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. We know for a fact that that restaurant opened in 1983, and we have the Fall Fest 83 that we see in Help Wanted. Maybe these dates aren't just a coincidence. Maybe this was the very same year that Fazbear opened Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in general, using Fall Fest as a way to celebrate it, but now with Fazbear branding all over the place. And this Fall Fest might have been a tradition that continued longer than we thought. It probably stopped happening around the 90s when everything terrible was going on with Fazbear, but we do get evidence from Special Delivery that events like Fall Fest still happen in the modern era. Maybe they brought it back when the Security Breach Pizzaplex was making infinite money. I have half a mind that the next time we encounter the Mimic, it will be at this very same modern Fall Fest, something that seemingly the Mimic would hate and want to stop. Meanwhile, we can try to stop the Mimic while we're there, and it would make for a pretty cool set dressing. And that's Fall Fest. That's everything we know about it tried to form into some recognizable shape. I hope it made sense. I think it did, but let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. And don't forget to go to tryfume.com/rytoast and use code RYTOAST to get a free Fume topper with your journey pack today. Thank you again to Fume for sponsoring today's video. I usually point you somewhere specific, but I'm gonna let YouTube figure it out. YouTube thinks you'll like this video. I think you will too. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share with #ToastArt. A huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.